Okay, hello, welcome to February's question and answer episode from my Patreon. If you're watching this for the first time, basically I have a Patreon campaign. There's a link down in the description, and my Patreon supporters can ask me questions every month, which I answer like this. So this month I have 4 questions, which I'll be rattling through, starting with Attila. Hi, Matt. Do you think Free League will put out any of the official solo rules into the SRD? Thanks. I don't think they will. No. I don't think... while there are some similarities between the approach that Twilight 2000 and Forbidden Lands have taken, I don't think you can establish those same solo rules across all of the game lines. And it definitely appears to be that they are taking a sort of a bespoke approach for each game that they are introducing solo rules for. I know this because on the One Ring, it had its own set of rules. Vaesen, which I was originally working on and then pulled out of because I just couldn't crack that one and didn't have the time to devote to it. They're bringing somebody else in to do that, and that's also going to be a very, very different style of approach. So I don't think it's really something you can apply a generalization to. They could theoretically apply some guidelines, but I don't think it's something I would... I would be very surprised if there was a solo section in the SRD. So, no, I don't see that happening. I think it's probably best to approach each game that you're working on. So why would you want to see solo rules in the SRD, I guess, would be my question. And if the answer is because the game that you're working on, you would like to have some solo rules in there, then I think it's best to try and look at it within the bounds of your own game, because that's kind of how Free League do it. And you can apply a very light sort of touch in terms of solo rules, just going with simple oracles and some very simple procedures, or you can try and come up with something a little bit more involved. But I don't think there's a kind of a this approach to it is not really one that kind of there's no real like cookie cutter approach that you can apply to all Year Zero Engine games, in my opinion. I'm sure people disagree with that, and there are definitely solo rule sets out there, or GM emulators or whatever, that will allow you to play any system using a consistent set of solo tools, and that would definitely work on any of these Year Zero Engine games, of course. But what Free League do is they provide a very tailored experience specific to the games that they're running, and I think they're a little bit better for that because things like the oracles are just, they're tailored to the game, so they just work that much better. So yeah, I don't think it's going to be happening. I would be surprised if it happens, but that's not to say it will never happen. Thanks, Attila. Next question is from Kobiak. Do you have any thoughts on the new Year Zero Engine free gaming license yet, compared to, for instance, releasing a game under a Creative Commons license? Thanks. The main thing I've looked at so far is the license itself and the wording of it, and I don't really have any issues with it. I have heard some people on the forums, for example, saying that it's very restrictive. It's more restrictive than the previous one. I don't really see that myself. They are specifying that the license is only to cover effectively like PDFs and virtual tabletop content, and it's not to be used for what they specifically call out NFTs and video games. And that is more restrictive, potentially, because that didn't really exist in the OGL that they were using before. But I think it also is fair on Free League that if somebody wanted to make a video game off of one of their using their rules, that they would want to like negotiate their own terms for that. I think that's kind of reasonable because video games tend to have higher profits than tabletop role-playing games. So from a business perspective, that kind of makes sense, I think. It's not open, obviously. If you did a Creative Commons sort of license, then there would be no real restrictions other than, providing, attribution, something like that. There's obviously different Creative Commons licenses. but I don't see it being super restrictive personally. Yeah, it's still a little bit early. I don't want to talk about it too much. I do plan on doing some videos talking about them in the kind of high level on the channel once they are out of their current sort of beta phase, because at the moment they've released basically the license and the SRD as two separate documents as PDFs, and they're asking for people to provide feedback. There are 2 forum posts with feedback on both of them. And yeah, I think it's a little bit premature. I don't really want to spend the time going through them with a fine-tooth comb, because I've gone through the license by reading it effectively word for word and didn't really have any big issues with it at all. I had read, or at least skimmed through, most of the comments that people had left, and I didn't really agree with a lot of them. I don't really see a big issue with it personally. And I'm perfectly happy to use it for my own projects. On the SRD, I have skimmed through it, and I really like what I see. I'm too busy to really get into the weeds and start leaving typo comments and talking about sections I would like to see or clarifications, etc. I have left a little bit of feedback, bouncing off of some feedback that somebody else left. But it's basically like a typo thing. And really, from my perspective, like, I've created a game using the previous OGL, which is Year Zero Mini, and I didn't really use any wording, or very, very little wording, from the previous OGL. And that's because I'm not kind of creating games myself using the terms from the SRD, I won't be making games using terms from the SRD. At least I'm not planning to. I'm planning on kind of rewriting all my stuff, and if there's something in the SRD which kind of makes sense, that I will happily use it, because I'm going to be using that license anyway to be able to use the Year Zero engine logo. But I'm not necessarily planning on just kind of rehashing the SRD personally. There's nothing wrong with doing that. It's just I kind of want to put my own spin on things. I like experimenting, and as I did with Year Zero Mini, it's quite different to anything that's come before in the Year Zero engine, while still feeling like it's similar enough to be called a Year Zero engine game. And likewise with Stiletto, the big project I'm working on. The rules are already written for that. I don't think I used much. Maybe I did use a couple of sections from the previous OGL, and I'll have to revisit those for the SRD. But really, it's written from the ground up by myself in terms of the rules, and I'm really happy with them. They've been play tested, and we're going to be play testing with 2 campaigns that are going to be starting on the channel soon. And yeah, I don't know. From my perspective, mechanics can't be copywritten. It's the text of the SRD that you're allowed to basically copy and paste. And yeah, I don't know. I don't really feel the need necessarily to do that. I kind of like taking that maybe as some inspiration, maybe as a starting point for some sections, but then rewriting it so it's in my own voice. That's kind of how I like to do things. So from my perspective, the SRD doesn't really interest me a whole lot, because I don't plan on using it like perhaps some other creators will be. That's probably smart to use it, because it'll save you some time. But yeah, that's my take on it. Comparing the license itself, so putting the SRD to one side, the license itself compared to Creative Commons license. Obviously, Creative Commons license is much more open than the one that Free League has released. But I don't know. I think it's still open. It's gonna allow me as a creator to create Year Zero engine games, and I don't even need to. The nice thing about it is, at least the current draft, you don't even need to include the full text of it in your document. You can provide a link to it, it says, which is a nice change. It means that I don't necessarily have to devote an entire page at the back. I can put a little blurb on the credits page talking about how this is not officially affiliated with Free League, and I can say it uses the Free League license, or whatever. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but I'm using the license, which you can find the text of here. And that's it. Like, that's a nice tidy way of kind of swallowing all that legal gumph up, and I hope that goes into the final version as well, that we're allowed to use a link. But yeah, other than that, I don't really see it as being super restrictive. The one thing I did think about was web apps, that there might be some web apps like we've seen for Merkborg that I might want to produce, or hire somebody to produce for some of my projects. And it's not super clear whether those fall under the Year Zero license or through the new license or not, because it looks like it only allows virtual tabletops and PDFs. So it's a bit of a gray area. Some people have picked it up and asked in the forum, and I didn't see a response yet from anyone from Free League. So in fact, that's something I might go back myself and just say, yeah, actually, I would like some clarification around this, because yeah, web apps are something that tie directly into tabletop games, and yeah, very different to an NFT and a video game. So I don't see them having a big problem with that. But again, I think this is a place where you could always ask for permission after the fact if it's not included in the text of the license. And if Free League say, yeah, we have no issues with you creating a web app for this game that is using our license, then that's more than enough. Like, if they've given their permission in writing, like in an email, I don't think you need to worry too much about it. And I can't see them really having a problem with it, to be honest. Especially if the web app is free, which is what I would plan on doing. So as a free aid to the product the game that you are selling. So I hope that answers the question. I mean, it's a bit vague. I don't have really concrete thoughts on it. I'm very happy with what's come out. I think it's a big improvement on the previous OGL. I'm glad that they've divorced themselves from Wizards in that respect, which is something people have been talking about for quite a long time, like finding it weird that Wizards, the Wizards license was being used. So yeah, overall, I'm fairly happy with the change, and I don't really see any big problems with the license or the SRD. Okay, thanks, Kobiak. Next two are from Martin, and I'll do them one at a time. First one is, what are your thoughts on the upcoming Walking Dead RPG? Mixed. I have been running my own Year Zero engine zombie game on and off for over a year now, and I was a little bit gutted when I first heard that that there was going to be a Walking Dead one, because it kind of meant I had plans to make this into a product to sell. I was planning on making a really cool Year Zero engine zombie game, and I just don't really want to compete against an official Walking Dead one with rules that are probably going to be different. But at the same time, who's going to play my little third-party one when there's a big licensed one out there? So instead, I'm hoping to produce some content to fit with the one that's coming out. For example, I really want to produce... so what I'm planning on doing is taking my own project and tweaking it a bit to make it compatible with The Walking Dead. Not officially, because with licensing, I'd be surprised if it is included in the workshop. So I'm going to be selling kind of like a system agnostic kind of thing, with maybe some stats for the Year Zero engine. So I'm going to be pitching it as a sort of... probably as a Year Zero engine zombie toolkit, and specifically have solo tools for it. That's my thinking anyway. So I kind of want to wait and see what The Walking Dead is going to look like, because if it's really good, I don't know how much more effort I'm going to be putting into the project I've already been working on. If The Walking Dead is good, which I hope it is, then yeah, I'll just embrace it fully, and that'll be my go-to thing. And any other stuff I produce for it will just be probably more like homebrew that can be shared for free, that I won't make any money on. But really, in my own game, I started off running basically The Walking Dead with all the serial numbers filed off, which I was calling Kentucky Zombie Apocalypse, set in the foothills of the Appalachians in Kentucky. And after about half of the sessions that I ran all together, I switched from it being Walking Dead sort of slow zombies to being effectively The Last of Us zombies. So much faster, also being infected by cordyceps, so this fungus, this parasite that affects the brain. And it made a huge difference. It went from being a sort of tense game, but more like a survival simulator, to being a proper horror game similar in way to Alien, and yeah, it really changed the entire tone of the game in a way that I thought was much better. So, yeah, I think from my perspective, I wouldn't play personally a zombie game that had slow shambling zombies, because I think it's not tense. It's not tense enough for what I like. So one of the tweaks I would be doing if I am ever running the Walking Dead RPG, I will be running The Last of Us using the Walking Dead rule set, and my own like homebrew tweaks to it. So those are my thoughts on it. I'm very, very curious to see what they come up with. I'm very much like waiting to get my hands on the beta, which inevitably is released with a Kickstarter, and we'll see what we see. And the second question, from Martin. Do you think Free League is focusing too much on acquiring new IPs? This is the question that is, everybody in the Year Zero community is kind of asking right now, because there are a lot of IPs being acquired. Almost it's probably more than one a year at the moment. For the last few years, there's been a new game coming out, and a lot of the recent ones are. They're not in-house games. In fact, very few of the Free League games are in-house. Almost all of them are IPs. In fact, if I look at the list, I think we've got 8 games right now, if we include Blade Runner, that have been released. We have Mutant Year Zero. That's an IP that's an external IP owned by. It used to be owned by Paradox. I think it's owned by Funcom now. The entire Mutant license. Coriolis is owned by Free League. Forbidden Lands is owned by Free League. Tales from the Loop and Things from the Flood are owned by Simon Stallenhag. So that is an IP that they license. I think I mentioned Coriolis and Forbidden Lands. What else have we got? We got Vaesen. Vaesen is not their own IP. It's an IP from the artist Johan Egerkrans. Then we have Alien number 6. Alien obviously is an external IP. Twilight 2000 is a 7th. That's an external IP. And then we have Blade Runner as number 8, which is obviously an external IP. Now we've got The Walking Dead, which is their 9th game. It's also obviously an external IP. So out of 9 games, only 2 of them are internal IPs. There is a Cthulhu game coming up, which we may see a Kickstarter for this year. We might not. That will be its own in-house IP, so that won't be an external thing. But other than that, yeah, there's a lot of talk about it. There's constantly new games coming out, and that diverts attention a little bit away from the previous games. It means that there's not as much support as there would be otherwise, because the manpower going into these new games could be diverted to supporting the already released games. I don't think that's a very accurate conclusion that a lot of people draw, because if they aren't releasing the new games, their cash flow will be much reduced. That doesn't necessarily mean that means that they won't necessarily have the amount of hours to devote to content that they do currently, because they're currently in a sort of cash-rich environment, if I can use that phrase, in this industry. It just basically means they have some money to be able to hire people to work on things, and I don't know. I think a lot of us, myself included, would like to see maybe a little bit less focusing on new titles and a little bit more of a focus on getting some of the expansions that have been promised for some of the older titles that have been promised for a long time finished. Like Ad Astra is the biggest one for Mutant, but though I know there are some big issues around that are causing it to be delayed. But yeah, there has been regular support for all of the lines coming out. I think the only ones that really feel like they've been a bit slower is Tales from the Loop. Coriolis has just had the campaign books coming out. There were a lot of supplements coming out, small adventures and things at the beginning, like through the Kickstarter really. And since then, it's mainly just been the campaign books, nothing else. And if you're not interested in playing campaigns, because this is a nice, cool sandbox that you can play in a very sandboxy way, if you don't want to play a sort of linear like campaign, there's very little support, and there's lots of ideas that you could come up with. There's lots of like plug-in small adventures and things that could be made. Obviously, the community's filling the gap there, but it would have been nice to have seen, I think, a little bit more in the way of other supplements other than the campaign books for Coriolis. Aliens getting a lot of love. Aliens getting a lot of expansions. That's partly because the writer for that, who is Andy Gaska, is passionate about the game and is a very prolific writer. So he is just like throwing content out there, and Free League are very lucky in that respect that they've got somebody that keen on the line. So Alien's been the one that's really had a lot of support, and I think it shows that the other ones haven't, because it's not been around for very long, and it's got just a ton of content out for it so far. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's a kind of a difficult one. Are they focusing too much? I think nobody would fault them for slowing the pace down a little bit in terms of new IPs being released each year, but I don't know what the financial situation is like in the Free League headquarters in terms of paying bills and paying salaries and all the rest of it, that they might need to have new games coming out to be able to support that. There is obviously going to be a crunch point at some point where either they're going to bite off more than they can chew, or not. I mean, if at some point they're going to have to keep expanding, they're going to have to keep hiring new personnel. They're going to have to increase the size of their business to be able to cope with all of the content, all of the game lines that they are supporting. And maybe that's part of the plan. I don't know. I've not spoken to him about it. But yeah. I don't know. It's a hard one to answer without knowing a lot of the particulars that go on in Free League. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of talk around this in the community. People who don't have any idea about why the decisions are being made, speculating about it, and I generally try and respond to these as somebody who's quite involved in the community by giving some facts, which is, well, there is planned support for all of these lines, or they've just received an expansion. So like, I don't know what the next steps are for Vaesen, but they literally just released the Mythic Britain and Ireland I think it was released to the public like October, November, so only like a few months ago. Same with like Twilight 2000. They've just released Urban Operations, which isn't even out in print, I don't think, yet for the public. And they've already announced the next supplement for Twilight 2000 as well. So that's well supported. And really the only ones that really that I'm not aware of anything being announced for is Tales from the Loop. So what I try and do is I try and like let people know, yeah, sure, there are a lot of new games coming out, and it does kind of, people do get frustrated that some of the expansions, they would hope that there would have been more expansions by now, so they feel like the lines aren't being supported enough. But Free League are actively working on every game line, it seems like, other than maybe Tales from the Loop, which I'm not sure about what's happening there. Although I think somebody has mentioned that there is maybe a campaign book or something that might be coming out for it. Actually, Electric State, I believe, has been announced, I think, or rumored. So there might even be like a third game in the series coming out for that. So yeah, things are being worked on. It takes time to develop games, I know that, and expansions as well. And it might mean, because they're spread so thinly, or they've got such a broad portfolio of games, that they can't put the same amount of people on a smaller number of projects to get them out the door faster. But I think if they had a smaller portfolio, then they wouldn't have the funds to be able to have as many people. So it would still be the same issue. You'd still have only one or two people working on each of these individual projects as the lead. And I don't think, like, people say, it seems like there's an assumption that people think that if they didn't have all these IPs, that the people would still be working with Free League, and they could just put like, oh, let's put 2 or 3 people on this expansion instead of just the one. They wouldn't do that because they won't be able to afford to pay, a person more than they're already paying the person or like the freelancer to do that project. They're not gonna if they have fewer IP or fewer game lines, they're not going to, just throw extra money at other projects. It doesn't work like that. So I think, yeah, I don't know. Maybe things would be a little bit faster because there'd just be fewer distractions for, I'm sure there's bottlenecks. Like I'm sure Tomas and Niels probably are quality controlling a lot of stuff before it goes out. So just keeping track of all those things probably takes up a lot of their time. I think they have a small number of graphics designers in-house who are probably a bit of a bottleneck in some respects. Maybe they're editors as well. I don't know. So maybe in that respect, things would move forward a little bit more fast, a bit more quickly. But yeah, I feel like I'm waffling now. I hope I've answered all of your questions. So thanks, the 3 of you that have asked them. And that's it for this month. So if you'd like to ask me a question for next month, if you're a Patreon supporter, then around the 3rd of every month, there's a new question post dropping on Patreon. Leave your question in the comments of those posts when they come out, and I will address them at the end of each month. That's me. Thanks very much, and catch you next time. Bye-bye.